welcome to our 7th bonus episode. This is Pierce Brosnan.
On today's episode, we're going to be talking about Pierce Brosnan, who was, of course, the 5th actor to play James Bond. We're continuing to release a special bonus episode of each of the actors that played Bond in the Eon franchise so far.
So just before we get into this one, Andy, I wanted to put I don't know if you'd say this as a bit of a disclaimer. So when when I was writing these initial notes, my wife was lurking around. So I said, we're just working on the Brosnan special. And I said, this is the one that you were looking forward to the most, weren't you? And obviously, I've mentioned this a few times on the podcast, Andy, where my wife keeps saying, I can't wait till we get to Brosnan film, saying it all the way through Connery, Moore, Lazenby, Dalton. And then when we first started GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies, she says, I think it might be in the Daniel Craig ones that I was looking forward to. So I mentioned that I was teasing her when I was writing the initial draft. And she went, yeah, they weren't as good as I remember. We're going to dig a bit deeper, but I just want to kind of put a bit of a disclaimer before we get into the main part of this bonus episode there.
Yeah, good thinking. What you might want to do as well is warn her that this is not the Daniel Craig episode. This is actually the Pierce Brosnan episode. Just put that out there.
I just don't know how you can confuse them because they don't even look alike, do they? It's just...
I could make a joke about how women think all men are the same, but it's not appropriate.
But do you remember I said earlier in the podcast how she said she's got that face blindness? So that is just a fallback excuse. So, yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to put, like I said, a bit of a disclaimer. So let's get straight into it now. So name at birth was Pierce Brandon Brosnan.
It's easy for you to say. It's quite a mouthful, isn't that? Pierce Brosnan, tongue twister. He doesn't sell seashells on the seashore. He's an Irish-American actor, film producer, and environmental activist. Born 16th of May, 1953, in, I'm going to get this wrong, aren't I? Drogheda, County Louth, Ireland. And by the nature of his birthday being the 16th of May, he is a Taurus.
Yeah, and when you think of Brosnan, well, when I think of Brosnan, Andy, I immediately think of James Bond. I think Brosnan is, I would definitely say, is best known for his portrayal of being the iconic character of James Bond. And, if you listen to this episode, please go back and listen to the episodes that we've covered for GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day. 4 very different Bond films, but they're definitely worth checking out so you can see the Bond, so you can see Brosnan portraying James Bond. They're definitely worth listening to and watching the films as well. So Brosnan has 5 children and he has no brothers or sisters.
And Google tells me that the town he was born in is pronounced Drogheda. There we go. Back to it. Brosnan has been married twice. First to the Australian actress Cassandra Harris, who sadly passed away from ovarian cancer in 1991. And then to the American journalist Kaylee Shea Smith, who he married in 2001. The couple have 2 sons together.
So this next section we're going to talk about what did Brosnan do before James Bond. And we had a similar format for the other special episodes that we've done for the Bond actors. So again, if you're listening to this for the first time, can you go back and listen to the episodes that we've done for Connery, Moore, Dalton, Lazenby as well, because you might find out something new about the actors that played Bond. So before his Bond role, Brosnan gained a recognition for his work on the television series Remington Steele, and I remember my dad having that on in the background when I was growing up. And there, in that role, he played a private investigator, oddly named Remington Steele.
Yeah, he'd done some other TV work as well, though. He was in shows such as Manions of America and Nancy Astor.
Yeah, and Brosnan has also featured in a number of films before James Bond. And one of these surprised me, Andy, so I'm going to kick us off. The Deceivers and Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, a couple more that spring to mind would be The Lawnmower Man and one of his more famous roles, I think, in Mrs. Doubtfire.
No, Andy, sorry, before you carry on, sorry to interrupt you there, Andy. When we were putting together the script for this special episode, I was very surprised that he did Mrs. Doubtfire before Bond, because I thought Mrs. Doubtfire came after he was in Bond, or at least after he did GoldenEye. But no, we sense checked this, we fact checked it, and he was in Mrs. Doubtfire before James Bond.
Yeah, Mrs. Doubtfire 1993, wasn't it? I think, and GoldenEye 95. But I guess it's one of those where, being the age we are, we were been quite young at the time. I think so. I would have been 8 or 9 when Mrs. Doubtfire came out, and you'd have been maybe mid-30s. And when you rewatch a few times, you kind of get confused in terms of which order it is, and it's maybe when you see Mrs. Doubtfire for the second or third time, it's like, oh, there's James Bond. But of course, for the first time, that wouldn't have been the case. But following Mrs. Doubtfire, not long afterwards, he did get the role of James Bond. But we need to go back a few years to give the true story of what happened, because he was actually offered the role of Bond when Roger Moore left the franchise back in the mid-80s. However, he was forced out of it to back out because of Remington Steele being revived. Now, this is not in the notes, but this is something I think I read recently. So if this is factually incorrect, we're going to cut this out and the listeners will never know any different. But my understanding from what I read recently was that Remington Steele was cancelled by the network. Brosnan was then offered the role of James Bond, and I think he even went as far as to do publicity shots and some screen testing and all that kind of stuff. So it was all guns blazing, as it were, for Brosnan to be Bond. But the hype that generated and the coverage of that within the media forced the network to rethink their decision to cancel Remington Steele, so they revived it, hence why Brosnan had to back out, because he was still technically under contract.
No, I support your statement there, Andy, because I also read that Remington Steele was revived as well. So yeah, he had to pull out. So I think we've discussed a number of what if scenarios, haven't we, during the main pod? What would the Bond franchise look like if Dalton never did Living Daylights or License to Kill, and Brosnan did those extra 2 films? So yeah, we discussed what ifs before, but it's an interesting tidbit of information there.
Yeah, it's just quite a strange series of events that he got the Bond gig because of the lack of Remington Steele, but then being Bond led to Remington Steele coming back. So it's kind of a bit of a double-edged sword there. It
reminds me, and I know it's not exactly the same, I can't think of the word, kind of example. That footballer who wanted to get a chance for, I can't remember his name, was it Peter Odenwingy, or his name is, where he travelled down from like the club, because I think, was he going to join, I don't know, QPR or something like that. But then I think Harry Redknapp was in charge, and he was saying like, no, you can't come into the training ground, or you can't come in to the building. That just kind of reminds me of that, like the anticlimax.
It certainly rings a bell about Odenwingy, but if that's not correct, apologies, Mr. Odenwingy.
So carrying on, Brosnan did state in an interview that the very first movie he ever saw was Goldfinger, and that Sean Connery's performance as Bond was bad, which was quite a bold statement there, Andy. And I wonder how old he was that he watched his very first movie, and he making that statement about the one of the favourite, if not the Bond actor that a lot of people will say is the best Bond actor.
I would think that kind of statement would put him in a minority. But let's say he watched it at the time it was released, of 1964. That would make him, 11 years old? So young critic, but a harsh critic if that was the case.
Yeah, indeed, very harsh. And one of the things that Brosnan, he was very mindful of the dangers of being typecast. So he did negotiate with Ian Productions that when he accepted the role, that he was allowed to work on other projects in, between the Bond series of films, which I think is very clever. And it's a similar approach that Daniel Craig has taken, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it, and the request was a smart one, and it was granted. So for every Bond film that he made, he appeared in at least 2 mainstream films in the interim. Now, some things we like to do is various bits of trivia on the rating room. So here's a bit of Brosnan trivia for you. Out of the 6 James Bond actors, Brosnan is the only one who's married and hasn't divorced. And the footnote to that is that Timothy Dalton never married. So there you go. That could have been one of your quiz questions for me, couldn't it?
It could have been. I wonder if you would have got it right or not. You're on mute.
I'm on mute. So I said that I definitely would have got that right, but the fact that I can't use my mute button properly maybe suggests otherwise.
So at the time of recording, Brosnan is also the only James Bond actor to have never appeared in a Bond film based on an original Ian Fleming novel or short story, which again, I think kind of could have been a quiz question, Andy, I could have thrown at you.
It's an interesting factoid, yeah.
And obviously, I mentioned before, Brosnan played the iconic character James Bond in 4 films. GoldenEye in 95, Tomorrow Never Dies in 97, The World Is Not Enough in 99, and Die Another Day in 2002. So again, make sure you go back and listen to those episodes and rewatch those 4 films, because for me, at least a couple of those are very good.
I would tend to agree with you, and our ratings would certainly back that up. His performances were generally well received by critics and audiences. He brought a kind of charming, suave demeanour to the role. His interpretation is often characterised by wit, sophistication, charisma, and there was a lot of action sequences, wasn't he, in the films? Or maybe that's a sign of the times, bringing Bond into the 90s and noughties. There's certainly a lot of great skill and precision in how he executed those sequences. Yeah,
definitely. You when you think of Brosnan, you do think about the action sequences, definitely. And he was very, like you said, a lot of charisma involved in Bond, and he also he knew how to do the one-liners, didn't he? As well, Bond. He was very good, Brosnan.
Yeah, really good delivery.
Brosnan's version of Bond was also a lot more emotional and thoughtful than some of his predecessors as well, which allowed us to get a bit deeper into the Bond's character and motivations. And if you think about looking back, like as obviously in the podcast we're rewatching these films, and when you look back at Pierce Brosnan's portrayal of James Bond, you've got to consider really that it's been successful as well, and a very memorable interpretation of such an iconic character. And his films do have a devoted following among the Bond fans as well. And I think there's a strong case really that he helped keep the franchise going during a lot of changing times and taste in cinema. And for me personally, I definitely think Brosnan was an actual fit to play James Bond. I think he's very attractive, even now as an older man. He's very attractive. He has an athletic build. He's a very good actor as well. And like I mentioned earlier, he can deliver good one-liners. His comedic timing is very good.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I would say it kind of brings a mix of the best of Connery and the best of Moore in some regards. I think from Connery, that kind of suave sophistication, and from Moore, the comedic and the comedic timing that you referred to, and his delivery of the one-liners. I thought it was a real step up from Dalton. Obviously we've spoken about Dalton's 2 films. For me, the films were good, but his portrayal was a bit inconsistent. Brosnan, I thought, was a real step in the right direction, and he also brought it into the 90s, bringing it into the modern audience as it was at the time. So I think he was the right choice to succeed Dalton. Okay, let's go back to the Rating Room's rankings that we did. So in our main pod, obviously we talk ratings for each film, so let's just do a bit of a recap of how we rated the films. So I'll start with my 4. So I ranked The World Is Not Enough as the best of Brosnan with 8 out of 10, followed by GoldenEye with 7, Tomorrow Never Dies with 6, and Die Another Day 5 out of 10. Jay, your order was slightly different to mine. Do you want to just give the listeners a recap of how you rated each of the Brosnan films?
Yeah, and we do have some subtle differences in terms of the ratings, in terms of what we're given each film out of 10, but we do have some differences in terms of the rankings. So I have GoldenEye as Brosnan's best entry in the Bond franchise at 8 out of 10, followed by his second film, Tomorrow Never Dies, 7 out of 10. And then his third film, Andy, The World Is Not Enough, is in third place, 5 out of 10. And his last film, the Madonna classic, Die Another Day, in fourth position, 5 out of 10. So, yeah, it's an interesting difference that we have. And just, for the people not quick at maths like me, that is a total of 25 out of 40 and an average of 6.3 out of 10 across the 4 films.
Yeah, mine is 26 out of 40 with an average of 6.5. So our overall pictures are very similar. But we do have some differences, don't we? World Is Not Enough stands out as one that we really were kind of poles apart in our opinions of.
Yeah, definitely. And like I kind of alluded to just a few seconds ago, for me, Brosnan era started off very strong with GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies. So like I said, 8 out of 10 and 7 out of 10. So a very strong beginning of his era. But for me, there was a definite decline in quality. So the next 2 films, obviously The World Is Not Enough and Die Another Day, I gave 5 out of 10. So there is a big step change in terms of quality from my point of view. And listeners, do go back and listen to The World Is Not Enough episode where me and Andy go a bit deeper in why we have such a difference in our ratings for that film in particular.
Yeah, I think generally I'm in broad agreement with you, but The World Is Not Enough is a standout. It was a surprising highlight for me. Really fun story, action-packed, just a really, really good film. And just I'll give a disclaimer of my own here at this point. I mentioned in the main pod that The World Is Not Enough was the first film that I actually saw at the cinema. So there's a bit of a romantic nostalgia about it. But I kept an open mind when I rewatched, and when I rewatched it recently, it still stands the test of time. I think it's just an absolute classic of a film, and maybe underrated by some, namely Jay. But that's what opinions are for. But for me, a really, really fun film.
And it is subjective. I know we see in our main episodes that all this is subjective. So listeners, if you agree with Andy or you agree with me, or you think it's the number 1 Bond film or the worst Bond film, just let us know and kind of argue your case why The World Is Not Enough should be placed higher or lower. But I think I mentioned it, Andy, at the end of the pod of The World Is Not Enough. I think after we finished rewatching all these films, I think that is the film that I might have to rewatch, and I don't want to say re-score it, because once we're done season 1, Andy, we're going to lock it in a vault, I think, and we're not going to touch James Bond. Maybe we will when future James Bond films come out. But for me, that's the film out of the ones we've rewatched so far is the one that I think, do I need to rewatch that? Because obviously you scored it so highly.
Interesting point. Maybe I overscored it. Who knows? Maybe I was just in a good mood that particular day. But that's the beauty of a podcast like ours, is that we can have a difference of opinion. We don't have to be antisocial about it. We can still get along.
Yeah, indeed, Andy. You can stay on my Christmas card list still. So moving on, I kind of mentioned earlier that GoldenEye is notable for the successful introduction of Brosnan, but also for revitalizing the franchise, because obviously there was a 6-year hiatus. And one of the other strong points coming out during the Brosnan era is that he had such a strong supporting cast around him. And when you think of some of the people that was in the Bond franchise at the same time, we obviously had Dame Judi Dench as M, Frank Jansen as the seductive villainess, Xena on the top, and many more actors and actresses in the franchise during his era.
Yeah, as well, GoldenEye stands out for memorable action sequences. You think about the chase scene that involved a tank in the streets of St. Petersburg, and that finale atop the satellite dish, really dramatic ending to that film. There was also, with the nature of the story, a bit of a deeper look into Bond and the Bond universe. With there was the idea of loyalty and betrayal, and ultimately the cost of revenge.
Yeah, definitely. When you talk about that, Andy obviously mentioned thinking about 006 in GoldenEye there, who, if I recall correctly, and Andy, if I'm not right, does Sean Bean reference that they're like brothers, or Pierce Brosnan at some point? I think
they do, yeah. There's a definite relationship that extends beyond just work colleagues, isn't there? There seems to be a close personal friendship alluded to throughout. So it really hits home the loyalty and betrayal aspect in particular.
Yeah, indeed. I bet they're both on their Christmas card list. So moving on, Tomorrow Never Dies was obviously Brosnan's second film, and it's very much known for its high-tech gadgets and, again, action sequences as well. And, you know, as Andy mentioned, you know, you had a thrilling chase with the tank in GoldenEye. In Tomorrow Never Dies, you get another thrilling chase scene, and that's the streets of Saigon as well. And you've got the helicopter chase there, and you've also got the explosive finale aboard Carver's stealth ship as well, where he meets a sticky ending. And one of the other notable aspects of Tomorrow Never Dies is the commentary on the power and influence of media in the modern world.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that they would have those sort of themes in '97, and here we are in 2023, and it's very much on topic, isn't it? So the film portrays Carver as this ruthless media mogul. He'll stop at nothing to create headlines. He shapes public opinion to his advantage, even at the risk of starting a war. So it's very, very relevant for today, and it adds a depth to the plot, I thought, as well, but a very, very interesting portrayal in terms of the villainous aspect of this character, and very different from what we've seen previously as well. Not just your standard megalomaniac, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And Carver is one of the few villains that is not really imposing, is he? He does rely on from the physical aspect for his henchmen.
Yeah, definitely not going to be causing Bond any problems in a fist fight. That's for sure. The third film of Brosnan's era, of course, the aforementioned The World Is Not Enough. What I will say, regardless of opinions and ratings and rankings, it is very notable for strong female characters, particularly Electra King, played by Sophie Marceau. Very complex Bond girl / villain, of course. Spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it. And we also have Dr. Christmas Jones, who certainly divides opinion, I think, amongst the Bond community. But, you know, think about, you know, what Dr. Christmas Jones was, you know, a nuclear physicist accompanying Bond on a mission. You know, it's a very, very powerful character, even if the portrayal of same by Denise Richards is maybe not appreciated fully by the audience.
And audience, listeners out there, me and myself and Andy have been interviewing a number of superfans across the globe, and Christmas Jones, Dr. Christmas Jones, should I say, Denise Richards, she does appear on a number of superfans' top 5 Bond girls as well, Andy. So, you know, she's there on merit.
Strikes a chord, that's for sure, with certain fans. But then you have to look at things like the Golden Raspberries that maybe the critics weren't so keen on Christmas that particular year.
No, I agree. So The World Is Not Enough also explores deeper themes as well, and in similar themes such as GoldenEye in terms of betrayal and revenge as well. So there's a bit of a running theme here across the Brosnan films, and also the cost of power. And then moving on to Brosnan's last film, which is Die Another Day, it is famous for high-tech gadgets. Again, that's a similar theme that runs through the Brosnan films as well, and very much over-the-top action sequences as well. And you think about the like the tsunami wave surfboarding scene as well, and then there's another car chase on ice as well in the ice hotel, which is pretty good, and a battle with a giant laser weapon as well. And also, I think one of the standout points from Die Another Day is the memorable performance by Halle Berry as the Bond girl Jinx. And also, I think you've got to give Toby Stephens credit as well for the villainous Gustav Graves.
Yeah, both interesting characters, has to be said. And Halle Berry was probably quite a surprising choice as a Bond girl in retrospect, but nonetheless, a creditable job. We get the similar kind of themes as well, the identity, betrayal, Bond questioning his loyalty as well. I think particularly, if I think back to the opening scene where he's effectively a prisoner of war, isn't he? Or he's captured, you know, is it worth it? You kind of see him questioning himself. And of course, this was his final film, Brosnan's final film. Mixed reviews upon release, has to be said. We both agreed as bottom of the pile. Felt like it was just a step too far. And you mentioned the gadgets earlier. That was certainly one thing. It just felt a little bit too silly, a little bit too convoluted. Yeah, just a disappointing end, I would say, to Brosnan's era.
Yeah, definitely agree. Obviously, like you said, we had the worst Brosnan film. And it would be interesting to see, Andy, when we do the Daniel Craig's special episode, how Daniel Craig's exit compares to, say, Brosnan's exit. Does it disappoint, or is it a good ending? Obviously, we can cover that in that special episode, but I agree it is a disappointing end to the Brosnan era. And, thinking back, even though he had a 4-film contract, he was very much still linked to the 5th film before they decided to move with Daniel Craig.
Yeah, it's another one of those what-if questions that we pose many, many times on the Rating Room. What if he'd have got that 5th film? What happens to the franchise from that point onwards? We'll obviously never know, but it's interesting to hypothesize about such things.
I agree, and my thoughts on that would be, I would have rather had Brosnan start earlier than finish later, would be my assessment.
I would tend to agree, and this is going to sound very harsh, but just get rid of Dalton. It wasn't a bad Bond. I don't want to completely belittle him, but if Brosnan takes over from Roger Moore and goes for those 6 films, I think the franchise is better off for it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, we've talked about James Bond now. I think let's move on to see what other kind of works Brosnan has done. So, what we've done here, we've picked out a number of other roles that Brosnan has appeared in. So these might not necessarily be his best roles, but they're the ones that we've picked out in this next segment. So I'm going to kick us off, Andy. So Mars Attack is top of the list, and I do want to add here, Andy, when I was a young boy, I went to the cinema to watch this, and it's a film that I regret. I would say I didn't pay for it because I was so young that my mum took me, but it's a film that I've actually saw at the cinema, and I thought I totally regret going to watch that at the cinema. And there's not many films that's happened to me where I've gone to the cinema and paid money and come out of it and thinking, oh, I wish I didn't go and see that. Usually when I go to cinema, it's because it's a film that I really want to see, and I'm not disappointed very often. The ones that spring to mind is Mars Attacks, Prometheus, the Ridley Scott alien film, are the two that jump out. Yeah, they're the two that really spring to mind, not counting kids films, when I took the kids to like Saturday, Sunday morning kids films kind of thing. What about you, Andy?
Yeah, my two that come to mind for regret paying, one would be Batman vs Superman. Very, very disappointing. I'm a huge Batman fan. Superman's okay, but I'm a huge Batman fan, and it was a very, very disappointing film. Really didn't enjoy that. And the other one that comes to mind is The Jungle Book 2. Now, I'm sure there's listeners out there who'll be like, Jungle Book 2, was that a thing? Yes, it was, and it came out of the cinema, and it was atrocious. It was, if memory serves me correctly, it was just over 1 hour long. So, a long TV episode. It wasn't even a film, I would argue. And Haley Joel Osment was the voice of Mowgli, I believe, and they sang The Bare Necessities at least 3 times. It's like we heard that in the first film. We don't need to keep hearing the same song over and over again. Just a complete money grab by Disney. Really, really poor.
You came across really passionate about that one, Andy, so I think I'm going to have to make sure that Jungle Book 2 isn't on any of my watch lists now. Just so
spoiler alert, we will not be covering the Jungle Book 2 on any future episodes of the Rating Room. I can tell you that right now.
So let's move on. Let's move back to Brosnan, Andy. So Dante's Peak is another film that we wanted to kind of highlight. The Thomas Crown Affair and The Tailor of Panama.
Yeah, some of his other notable works include The Matador, the 2 Mamma Mia films, Mamma Mia and Mamma Mia Here We Go Again. My. I won't go any further now. I can't do it. Also, The Ghostwriter and The World's End. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pick out some of his films that we personally like, not the James Bond films in this instance. So we've picked 5 films each that we like that Brosnan has starred in. Are these in 1 to 5 order, or no, in my case, no particular order? But Jay, do you want to kick us off? What are your 5 memorable Brosnan films?
Yeah, so for me, yeah, like you, then there's no particular order there. So for me, the 5 films that I enjoy watching Pierce Brosnan films are Mrs. Doubtfire, The Thomas Crown Affair, which I had on DVD when I was a teenager, very good film. Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief. So there's been, I think, 2 or 3 Percy Jackson films, and he was only in the first one, Andy. He left the franchise and he was replaced by the bloke from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Did you watch that? I didn't watch it. He was, I think, the librarian.
I've not seen any of the Percy Jackson films.
Okay. So basically, Pierce Brosnan was replaced with the bloke from the coffee adverts. I can't think of his name, but he was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And he was in, in the UK, he was in the coffee adverts that we were growing up, and I can't remember which brand it was, but it was like famous adverts that kind of were related to each other. But he was replaced by that actor. The Matador and Dante's Peak makes my top 5.
So I've tried to avoid crossover where I can, but Dante's Peak was one that would have made my list. Two crossovers that I have kept in. Thomas Crown Affair is one of them. Really, really solid film. Mrs. Doubtfire is a fantastic film, and I think obviously most memorable for the portrayal of Mrs. Doubtfire by Robin Williams, who was a tremendous actor and comedian. Just a really, really fun film. But Brosnan's role in that is sizable. He's not one of the main parts, but he's got a decent part in it, and he does a great job as a supporting cast. Now, you mentioned Mars Attacks earlier as one you regret seeing. I remember watching this at school, like last day of the term sort of thing, and I actually quite enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun film. I mean, maybe the fact that you and your family had to part with money was a deciding factor for you, but for me, I thought it was quite a good film. I quite liked it. Another film I've watched relatively recently, I don't remember much about, and it's a bit of a cheat because I didn't realise it was Pierce Brosnan, is Quest for Camelot. So Brosnan voices a part in that. I believe it's a Warner Brothers animation, but yeah, it's one I've watched recently, and it's not one that's necessarily got favourable reviews, but I quite enjoyed it. And then a film we mentioned in the list earlier that I've not seen for many, many years is The Tailor of Panama, where, if memory serves me correctly, he plays an MI6 agent. If he doesn't, we'll cut that out, but I'm pretty sure he's an MI6 agent in that, and that's just a really, really cool film.
I've only ever seen that film once, so I don't recall. I just assumed it was about a tailor in Panama, Andy. So if he's MI6,
I need to Google it because I'm now doubting myself. Speak amongst yourself, listeners. This could take a while.
So Andy is just Googling now, online Google search, why we're recording the podcast.
Yeah, Jay's going to fill for time with a couple of songs. Yeah. Oh my God.
They don't want to listen to me sing.
Yeah, I thought as much. He plays the role of Andy Osnard, who was an MI6 spy reassigned to Panama.
So yeah. So,
long time ago I saw it, but I remember enjoying it at the time.
So that kind of, spoilers, listeners. I'm gonna mention a future Bond film that we've not rewatched yet. The Tailor of Panama could be a Bond in the South/Central America, similar to when Daniel Craig goes to, is it Cuba in No Time to Die?
It is indeed. Yeah.
A little tenuous link there. But moving on. Come on. Let's move on, Andy. So now next section is where we look at Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, and we pull out the top 5 Brosnan films. So I'm going to kick us off, and I'm going to go through the top 5 Brosnan films on Rotten Tomatoes. So this is in order, and it's on the order of the Rotten Tomatoes. So it's not the audience rating, it's the Rotten Tomatoes rating. So number 1, which, a film we haven't mentioned above, is The Long Good Friday, which is a very good film, released 1 year before I was born, 1980, and has a Rotten Tomatoes rating of 97% and an audience rating of 89%, followed by The World's End, which came out in 2013, a rating of 89% for Rotten Tomatoes and 72% of the audience score. The Ghostwriter in 2010, 84% and 70%. GoldenEye, so that is a top rating in terms of James Bond for Pierce Brosnan, 1995, and a rating of 80%. And interestingly, the first time in this list that the audience rating is higher than the Rotten Tomatoes rating with 83%. And the last one on the top 5 list here for me, before I pass over to Andy, is Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again. A film that I have no intention of watching, and its year release 2018, 79%, and an audience score, I think that's quite low really, considering it's a top 5 score, 66%.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jay. Before I move on to IMDb, just to call out, my wife has seen the first Mamma Mia film. I have not, and I will not be. She said it was maybe the worst film she's ever seen. So there you go. That's an official review from wife of famous podcaster. Worst film she's ever seen. Mamma Mia. There you go. So let's look at IMDb. So this is the top 5 Brosnan films according to IMDb, obviously excluding documentaries and uncredited roles. A little bit of crossover with Rotten Tomatoes. We've got The Long Good Friday, top of the pile again, with a 7.6 rating on IMDb. GoldenEye comes second in the list with a 7.2 rating. The Ghostwriter comes third in the list with 7.2 rating. So there's the 3 that cross over. And then 4 and 5, we've got some difference of opinion between the 2 sites. Mrs. Doubtfire comes in at 4 from 1993 with a 7.1 rating. And rounding out the list is 2010's Remember Me, also with a 7.1 rating.
So this last section is the awards and honours. So we've just picked a selected list. So Pierce Brosnan has had numerous nominations and awards, but we've just picked out a few here. So the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy and Horror Films, also known as the Saturn Awards, he was nominated 4 times for Best Actor Award for The Matador, Die Another Day, GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies. Interestingly there, Andy, hint hint, no, The World Is Not Enough. So, maybe my scoring is justified. And he was the winner of Best Actor. Andy's not impressed there, audience. You can't see this, but he's not impressed with my little statement I slipped in there. And he was successful in winning the Best Actor Award for Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yeah, interesting that 3 of the 4 nominations were for Bond films. So I see your Saturn Award comment, and I raise you the Empire Film Awards, where he was nominated and won the Best Actor Award for what does that film say in the note there, Jay? Is that The World Is Not Enough? It is indeed. So point counterpoint. Listeners can decide which of one of us is correct. But I'm with the Empire Film Awards, fine establishment that they are. Nominated and won Best Actor Award for The World Is Not Enough, and also for the Golden. Do that again. In terms of the Golden Globes, he was nominated twice for The Matador, Best Performance by an Actor in a Motion Picture, Comedy or Musical, and Nancy Astor, Best Performance by an Actor in a Supporting Role in a Series, Miniseries or TV Film. Those are some of the longest award names I've ever had to read. So, quite the array of awards there for both Bond and non-Bond work.
Indeed, and I wonder what category we would be nominated in the podcast awards, Andy.
We should probably let the listeners decide. Are we Oscar-winning podcasters, or are we raspberry-winning podcasters?
Indeed.
We'll leave it at that point. This is probably a good time to end with a ... But thank you, listeners, for checking out our Pierce Brosnan special episode. We'd love to hear from you. Obviously, contact us on the usual social media accounts via our website, and let us know what your favourite Brosnan films and TV shows are, whether that's Bond or otherwise. And listen out for future episodes of The Rating Room coming up, where we talk about the rest of the Bond series as we move into the Daniel Craig era. We've got some more special episodes coming soon as well. And until then, thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon right here on The Rating Room.
Well, that's this week's episode done. We hope you enjoyed it.
Special thanks to the band Sugar Tongue for the theme tune to The Rating Room. You can find them on all the usual social media channels, and be sure to check out their song The System, available now on Spotify.
You can find and message us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram by searching The Rating Room.
You'll find all our social media links on our website, theratingroom.com, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Or feel free to drop us an email at theratingroom@gmail.com. Goodbye, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week, right here on The Rating Room.